I'm going to get in trouble with this one. I want you to hear me out first. The author is not dead. I know that this conception exists and I know why it exists. I think that as a reader, when we're talking about reader community spaces, the author should not be involved. And I agree with that. I think that it is true that the author should not be involved in those spaces. But I have some quibbles. When I first started my second novel, No Gods, No Monsters, I had this conception of what I wanted it to be. I knew I wanted it to be an urban fantasy. And I knew that I wanted it to have werewolves and vampires and all of the stuff of that genre. As the project evolved, it became something more than that. I knew I wanted it to be an ensemble cast. I knew I wanted it to also have an unusual narrator. I knew I wanted it to be attached to this larger cosmology that I've been working on for decades at this point. And so as I worked on it and as I developed it in my mind and I started outlining it, it grew and grew and grew, and it became this larger project. I wanted to tell a narrative of the building of a community over 3 books. And I had written The Lesson, which was also another mosaic novel. A mosaic novel tends to be broken up into sections or parts that focus on individual characters, and then it connects into this larger, grander story. No Gods, No Monsters, I intended to try this project again. I knew I wanted it to be a mosaic, but I wanted it to be a mosaic where the people in the mosaic aren't immediately connected. I was aiming for all of those connections to be established for the most part by the end of the story. And so in order to build a story in that way, you have to set it up in such a way that you don't know who these people are and how they relate to each other yet, and that each section of the novel would explore each individual character and the things that are important for them in their lives. So instead of prioritizing a grander narrative or a grander plot, I was more interested in exploring the individual narrative threads of each person. So there's this big thing happening, but I didn't want it to be about the big thing. I wanted it to be about the people and their individual lives. I wanted to give weight to their individual struggles. And I wanted each vignette focusing on each individual character to prioritize what was meaningful to them and to have that be also in response to the thing that is happening in a larger story. So the larger story is always there. The implications of that larger story is always there. But for the individual character, those things don't matter as much. But as the story develops, as you take all of these things together, you start to see this larger picture of this world that is being impacted in big ways and small ways by this new big thing that is happening in the world. There's a point to all of this, I promise, and I'm getting to it. So I wrote the novel. I tried to honor the project that I set out for myself, the thing that I wanted to do. And then it was out, right? It was out in the world and people were starting to read it. And there was a thing that happened, and I talked about this in an earlier video. Some people read it and they loved it, and it had a really good critical response too. Other people hated it. No Gods, No Monsters, it's by far my most polarizing project. I think We Are the Crisis, which is the second book in the series, does more things to try to alleviate some of the frustration that the people that hated the first book had, or the people that were still on the fence about the first book. I think the people that actually hated the first book did not read We Are the Crisis. No Gods, No Monsters is polarizing because it does not prioritize all the time plot. Now, this is not what I would say. Like, in my opinion, it does. It's always prioritizing plot. So like when I outlined each of these sections, each of these vignettes, there's always a thing that's happening in the person's personal life. And then there's a way it connects to the larger story, and it moves the larger story forward in some way. There's some reveal, there's some event, there's some question that pushes the narrative forward. However, because I have a story that prioritizes the individual and their individual needs and desires and conflicts, that stuff is at tension with this larger plot stuff, right? They themselves are not interested in all of the plot stuff. Because of this, the story has been accused of being plotless or wasting time or overly invested in backstory. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of these things, but it makes me, I'll get to that. Once I realized that readers themselves were having a hard time, and I did not anticipate this. Once I noticed that they were having a hard time, I made the decision to write a guide. And I wrote that guide to try to explain conceptually what the story was doing, in hopes that if I explained conceptually what I thought the story was doing, and I gave examples of other things that I had read or that I was referencing that were doing similar things, like The Wire or The Leftovers. I used a lot of TV references. I think I also used Station 11. I was hoping that readers that needed that would get that information and be able to use that as a lens to read the book. It was not me trying to be condescending or me insulting readers' intelligence. I was trying to be helpful, legitimately. I put it on my website. I had a longer version on my website and I put a shorter version on Goodreads. And readers would look at the shorter version and click to the longer version and read both, or they would read one. Some readers did find it valuable. Other readers thought if you have to write a guide for a novel, then you have failed as a novelist. I don't know if I agree or disagree. I think it's a take. It's certainly a take. And yes, I don't know a lot of people that have written guides for their novels. So maybe they're right. Here's why I want to talk about something that I think that readers don't talk about enough, but writers talk about all the time. And that is the difference between a story and a project. Notice I used the word project. In my mind, project is very different from story. A story is a narrative. It's a thing that holds everything together. It holds the characters, it holds the setting, it holds the plot, it holds all of this stuff together. Taking it as a whole, that is the story, the sum of things. And a project is related to that. What a project is a thing that a writer is trying to do that is a challenge. It is a meta-narrative aspect of the story. It is a part of the story that is in conversation with other stories. And in No Gods, No Monsters, this meta-narrative aspect, this project, was writing a story where the protagonist isn't a single person. And there is not one single person that makes the world change, but it is a collection of people and a collection of actions, and that we shouldn't even prioritize important people in this process of change. We should prioritize everybody. And those people look different. Those people behave differently, and those people have different values about what is important. That's the project. And that project is in conversation with a history of narrative that prioritizes a single individual, a single protagonist doing a thing and saving the world. It is imagining the world where players are both great and small, and it is communities that make change, and communities are built and fall apart. And this was a huge part of what I wanted to do with the story. And so it affected the structure of the story. It made the plot move differently than in a traditional narrative where you have a single protagonist. That is what I mean by project. The story can be in conflict with the project, or they can be at tension with each other. That certain parts of a project might push a story in a way that feels very, to some people, anti-story. I feel this tension as an author when making a story, when outlining, when drafting, when revising a story. I feel this tension as an author, but I also think readers feel this tension. Readers are in conflict sometimes with what a book is trying to do, or what an author is trying to do with a book, and what they want from a book. I hope this makes sense. Now, the author, because of this discourse, there's one thing that they can do when they see things not going well. They shut up. They play dead. That's what an author does. And that is something that I've been doing for my entire career so far as a writer. I do not engage publicly with any reading of my work that I might disagree with or that I might want to have a conversation about. I do not go on Goodreads or anywhere and debate anybody about the work itself. Sometimes I will have readers tag me with their responses to my work, and I will like that response and I will say thank you. Thank you for reading, and I really appreciate them taking the time. If they're critical, I will not engage. And this is the general practice. This is the understood thing that authors should do. This is what authors tell each other in private. Do not engage. Do not say a word. And there is a lot of examples of authors saying stuff, authors being in their feelings a little bit and saying things and it blowing up in their faces. I'm not going to give authors full cover here. And I want to stress this. Criticism is good, and criticism should be welcomed. And authors sometimes have really bad takes to criticism. So I'm not saying authors are completely in the right here, but I don't think we're completely in the wrong either. There's room for nuance in all things, and there's room for nuance especially here. When you look at the thing, the problem is authors are not dead. They're writing as this stuff is happening. They write in response to this stuff. We Are the Crisis is way more plot focused than No Gods, No Monsters. I knew that the first book was, here's a bunch of individuals that find small communities. And that the second book would be about, here's these small communities that find each other and become a larger community. And then the third book would be, here's this large community that have found each other and is now the protagonist of the story. I did not abandon that project, but I did try to prioritize plot more. I made sure that things were happening more, and I tried to focus less on backstory when I could. I tried to de-emphasize character. Now, I have a lot of feelings about that. We Are the Crisis frustrates me in some ways. And some of that is because We Are the Crisis was just happening during a harder part of my life. But I also feel like because I was trying to have this conversation with readers and I was trying to give them what they want, I sometimes did that at the expense of what I think the story needed. And in Ruin, the book that's coming out in September, the last book in the series, I try to find a balance within the balance, if that makes sense. When an author is making a story, they know what's about to happen. Some things might be a surprise in drafting and revision. They might change things as they go along, but they have a general sense of everything. They are not driven by the same things that readers are driven by. They're not driven by climaxes. They know what the climax is going to be. They know what the inciting incident is going to be. They have some idea of how it will resolve. What authors are driven by are projects, a thing that they want to do in conversation with things that have been done, aspects of the story that are in conversation with other stories. It's a meta-narrative element that is a huge motivation for a lot of writers. It is not just the story itself. It is, what is this story adding to a history of narrative? I know this sounds really pretentious, but if you ask me, if we're having a drink together, right, and I'm at a bar and we're just chilling out, and you ask me why I wanted to write a book like this or a book like any book, I'm not going to talk about the story. I'm going to talk about all the things that I want to do with the story. And that is very different. Like all the things that get me excited to sit down and write a story that I already know the ending for. That is the reason why authors write. And so to then ask authors, I'm going to get in so much trouble here, to then ask authors to do that and then kill themselves is, to me, a really reductive approach to a conversation between being a reader and being a writer. How can I put this in a way that doesn't sound really defensive? I think readers should be more interested in the why a story is being told. Like why a writer has decided to do a thing. It's not all entertainment. It's not all to keep your interest. You can hate a thing. You can think that a thing is unsuccessful in what it's trying to do. But I think it should be a conversation. I don't think that you should assume one person within that conversation has died. Is that a bad take? I don't know. Authors creating projects is not a malicious process. We hope that we are able to establish a link of communication between us, the work, and the reader. We're hoping that we're still there in that process, right? Because it's coming from us. It is a thing that we wish that we saw, or a thing that we wanted in narrative, a thing that we wanted that we're trying to bring into being. And so we're doing it earnestly. And I think that, this has to be counteracted with a thick skin. I think authors need to deal with the fact that they're going to get criticism. And I think that I've been very good. I've been very good at taking it. But I think this is a component of the conversation that won't be talked about if authors don't show up to talk about it. And so here I am showing up to talk about this aspect of the conversation because it's valuable. I think it makes sense. As a reader and as a writer, I approach narrative from the perspective that narrative isn't done, that we are always doing work to push the medium forward. And we don't have a flashlight. We're kind of doing that in the dark. When we approach a thing, when we think of a project that we want to do that is in conversation with what has come before, but is trying to do something that pushes something forward, we have to go into the dark and make a home there where this thing can now exist. And because we're doing all of this in the dark, it is a messy process and it isn't wholly successful. But successful or not, I think that the process is really important. And I think that it is something that I think we are inadvertently discouraging in authors and artists. This process of pushing forward, of taking risks, of being willing to take a chance on something that might fail. And I think that we should want art to move. And that we can be critical of it in its movement, but we shouldn't be critical of it for trying to move. So am I saying that readers should be kinder? No, not exactly. When I started getting published, it was short stories. With short stories, there's not really a big audience for it. Not a lot of people show up to read a short story. So if I wanted to know how my story was doing, the only place I could go is to review sites. And so I did. And once I started that habit, it was really hard to stop that habit once I started publishing books. I would show up to those same review sites to see how people are receiving my books. And sometimes it would be harrowing. Sometimes it would be immensely encouraging. I will say that I respect a really thoughtful review that is engaging with the project of what I'm trying to do, but is still critical of it. I don't go away from those reviews feeling angry or upset. Sometimes I go away agreeing with the person. So it's not that, what I'm asking for or what authors would be asking for is an unreasonable thing. It's not that we're saying, don't say bad things about us. I hope that we're not saying that. If you're going to put forth the effort of reading a work, I think we should be reading that work with this idea in mind. What is an author trying to do with this project? What are the ways that they are succeeding at doing that? And what are the ways that they are failing? Authors need to know this too, so that we can do it better the next time. But we can't do it better retroactively. We have to allow the thing that we tried to do and attempted to do to exist in order to build on that thing the next time. The author needs to love their messy attempts, but I think the reader also needs to engage with messy attempts. You don't have to love it. Give the author a 3-star if you think that's what the author deserves. But try as much as you can to approach an author's work with the same earnestness that they put into making that work. I hope this makes sense. I hope it doesn't get me canceled. I know for a fact other authors feel the same way. So I hope some authors will come and back me up if anything happens. Most likely what's going to happen, because this is a channel with very few subscribers, this is not going to go anywhere. I'm shouting into the dark, but hopefully I'm going to treat this as a time capsule. Eventually someone will go back through these videos and find this video and find it helpful, whether it be a reader or an author. So yeah, this is one that I've been thinking about doing for a while and I couldn't figure out what the approach would be. And I might do it again. I might do it again in another form, but I think I wanted this to just be me just talking to the camera. So here I am talking to the camera about this very specific thing. Thank you for your time. Hopefully I'll see you next time.